Now on to the mandatory budget cuts, less than a month away, and people are bracing for impact. Cities like Charleston are prepping for $1.2 trillion in cuts over 10 years. That is about half of it coming from defense, and Charleston is home to 250 defense contractors. The industry generates up to 10% of the city's economy. So how much is all this going to hurt? With me now is South Carolina's State Treasurer, Curtis Loftis. Welcome to the show, Treasurer. We're happy to have you.
Well, thank you very much. Glad to be here.
This is going to be really tough on Charleston in particular. I mean, your state is going to be hit really hard, but Charleston itself gets about 10% of its workforce from these contracts.
That's right. Federal government is very important in states like South Carolina, and the military is. We've got a long military tradition. Here in Columbia, Fort Jackson is the largest training base in the world. 50,000 recruits turn out every year. So it means a lot. 140,000 jobs, $16 billion a year. It's 7% of our state's budget.
It's huge. And then on top of that, when we went around asking people sort of what can they do to make up for this loss, they said, oh, well, Boeing is expanding their Dreamliner plant. That's our big cushion here. That's going to save a lot of jobs. I don't know if you've heard, but there are some problems with the Dreamliner and Boeing right now. So it seems like this is just a cluster of bad luck.
Well, it is, but we're not at that point yet. You know, we are still in this process. And what we've got to do is make sure that we demand a different dynamic. Now what we've got is people negotiating in private or both the left and the right shouting at each other through television cameras. We've got to get the adults in a room, and they've got to, in a transparent and accountable way, make a budget. You know, we can't push the process along otherwise. So until this happens, it just won't work.
But what's your hope that that's going to happen? I mean, that feels pretty hopeless.
Well, it is, but sequestration is something no one likes. I come from the right wing of the party, the conservative branch, and I have a visceral attraction toward cutting budgets. But you don't want to take an axe to a pound cake, and that's what we're doing here. You can't do it. It doesn't work for anybody. It will affect the state's credit ratings, the state's jobs. It will, to go with another cliche, it's throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
But when you hear somebody like Paul Ryan say that he's prepared to go ahead with the sequestration, do you think he's bluffing then? Because he sounds very serious.
Well, he may be bluffing, but I think he's wrong. This is an adult's problem, and the dynamic we have now is being played out by children. The American people know better. We understand what's happening. You look at the polls and separate them from election polls. We understand we can't have so much debt, and we'll be at $17 trillion by next October. But we can't sustain that.
But what you're talking about has been going on for a long time. I mean, you talk about it's just the children negotiating. Both sides are yelling at each other. That's what we've been watching in Washington for a very long time. So it seems like we have gotten to a position where Republicans are willing to go ahead with this because they see no other way to cut spending.
Well, and that's the dynamic today. We've got, I think, 24 days. Is that right? We've got some time, and there is time for adults to act, and we must. You know, there's this great attraction on the left. Let's have sequestration so we can cut the defense. But it's not going to work that well because they have their own constituencies that will be affected. You know, they go through the entitlement programs. We've got to have adults in a room in a transparent process.
What would be your strategy then if you were there? If you were there, what would you say? Because you keep talking about adults in the room. I love that idea. How would you make that happen? Would you offer something specific? Would you include specific people? What's your advice?
That's right. Well, there's certain things that must happen. The United States Senate must have a budget because they come up for re-election, and we've given them a pass for 4 years. They get to go home as Santa Claus. They never have to vote against anything. So to demand the Senate have a budget, that's simple. It's in the Constitution. We ought to do it. Second thing is, and this is kind of for the illustration purposes, they've got a pay raise in the future. No one should get a pay raise. No one should get a pay raise until we bend that debt curve downward. Yeah, I come from business. It's unacceptable. You get fired when you have this kind of problem.
Sure.
So we've got to start talking in these terms. But we can and we must demand that people go to a room in a transparent way. The Republicans lost that first negotiation because we did it in private.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense,
no
Treasurer. I'm sorry, we got to go. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.